The email hit my inbox at 6:12 a.m., long before the office lights flickered on or the coffee machine sputtered to life. The subject line was short, termination notice, but the message inside was the kind of corporate poetry that's meant to sound sympathetic while kicking you straight in the ribs. According to HR, I was being let go for persistent delays in project delivery and inability to maintain required speed. I stared at the screen in the quiet of my kitchen, rereading the phrases like they belonged to someone else. Too slow? After 8 years of flawless reviews, crisis rescues, and weekend marathons that saved more deadlines than the VP's entire leadership team combined? It felt like a joke, until I saw the C-suite recipients, the VP of Operations and her niece, Tara, the new junior project manager who had joined 3 weeks earlier and already acted like she owned the place. Suddenly, the joke wasn't funny. It was personal. I remembered Tara's first day, bright smile, glossy nails, a portfolio that looked like it had been assembled during a brunch. She'd breezed into meetings with the confidence of someone who had never once been told no in her life. She called the VP Auntie Lynn loud enough for the entire floor to hear, and within a week, she was shadowing me full-time. Shadowing, in her mind, meant scrolling through her phone while I explained processes she barely pretended to care about. After one status meeting, I caught the VP giving her a proud, approving nod, right after I'd finished doing all the talking. Tara didn't work, she absorbed credit. And suddenly I was too slow? No, I wasn't slow. I was in the way. I didn't go to the office that morning. Instead, I spent the day gathering my documentation, the kind employees are told not to keep but secretly do anyway. Email threads proving who completed which tasks, timestamps showing who logged work, screenshots of project files with version histories that didn't lie. Tara had finished pieces of work that she never even opened. She had signed off on deliverables she didn't understand. She had delayed tasks because she was too busy online shopping and meetings. I compiled everything neatly into a shared folder labeled for leadership review, performance integrity. I wasn't going quietly. If they wanted to push me out, fine. But they were about to learn exactly what they'd chosen to keep instead. My final day was supposed to be just a formality, badge in, badge out, maybe a forced smile from HR. But as I approached the project room, I immediately heard it, shouting. Not the usual corporate bickering, but full volume, throat tight, panic-laced yelling. When I walked in, the scene was glorious. Tara was standing in the middle of the conference room with tears streaking her foundation, her laptop open in front of her like a crime scene. The VP looked like she had aged 10 years in 10 minutes. The latest client rollout, a multi-million-dollar contract, had crashed spectacularly. Files were corrupted, tasks were incomplete, and entire sections had been overwritten with blank data. And because Tara had insisted on taking the lead, the mistakes were all traced back to her credentials. I leaned casually against the doorframe. Rough morning? The VP spun around, eyes narrowing. This isn't the time, Daniel. Actually, I said, pulling out my badge one last time, it's the perfect time. I placed a small printed note on the table, the link to the performance integrity folder. You might want to review this before you decide who was actually too slow. Or who just didn't understand what they were doing. Watching their faces as they opened the evidence was like watching a building implode in slow motion. Tara's mouth fell open, the VP went sheet white. Every lie, every stolen credit, every covered mistake, it was all there, undeniable and time-stamped. The breathtaking thing about the truth is that when it's documented, no amount of nepotism can bury it. I walked out without waiting to hear their excuses. But as I reached the lobby, the VP came running after me. We need to talk, she said, breathless and shaken. No, I replied, handing her my badge. You need to rebuild credibility. Preferably with people who actually work. I stepped outside into sunlight that felt warmer than it had in months. Behind me, the company was collapsing into chaos of its own making. Tara's mess had triggered a client audit, which triggered an executive inquiry, which triggered exactly the kind of internal meltdown that keeps HR awake at night. I didn't stick around to see how it all ended, but word travels. Tara was gone within a week, and the VP was transitioned shortly after. As for me, I found a new job where being thorough wasn't considered slow, it was considered valuable. Funny how that works. Sometimes office revenge doesn't require sabotage or scheming. Sometimes all it takes is letting people hang themselves with the rope they insisted on taking from your hands. The fallout didn't peak until 2 weeks later, when a former coworker, someone I actually respected, asked if I was free for lunch. I figured it was just a catch-up. Instead, he walked in with a grin so wide I knew something delicious had happened. "You haven't heard, have you?" he asked, sliding into the booth. I raised an eyebrow. "Heard what?" He folded his hands like he was about to say grace. "The VP tried to blame the entire disaster on you. Everything. Missing files, corrupted deliverables, the client blow-up, all pinned on the guy who wasn't even in the building." I laughed out loud. "She really tried that?" "Oh, she went for it. Full meltdown in front of the internal inquiry team. Tears, excuses, the works." He took a sip of his drink. "Then someone on the team opened that integrity folder you left." I leaned back, savoring the moment. And, he said, drawing it out, "they found everything. Every login, every timestamp, every project file version. All pointing to Tara. Not you." I shook my head. She must have forgotten version history exists. She also forgot that IT tracks every device she used. He smirked. "Turns out on the day the deliverables got corrupted, she was logged into the project system on her laptop and browsing makeup hauls on a second monitor. They pulled the activity logs." I couldn't hold in the laugh that escaped. Multitasking at its finest. "Here's the best part," he said, leaning in. "When the client demanded to know who had approved certain errors, Tara tried to claim her credentials had been misused." "Let me guess," I said. "They checked the security footage." He snapped his fingers. "Exactly. Time-stamped footage of her sitting at her desk approving each one." I covered my face with both hands, laughing into my palms. "Oh my God. You're not even at the company anymore," he said, "and you're still the most competent person in that department." I shrugged. Low bar. But he wasn't done. The client wasn't satisfied with an apology. They demanded a full procedural audit. And when the audit team dug further, they discovered that the VP had been quietly inflating her niece's performance reviews to justify fast promotions. "That tracks," I said. "She also bypassed multiple training requirements on Tara's behalf." I sat up. "Wait, mandatory requirements?" "Oh yeah. The ones tied to the compliance policies." He looked at me with a face that was halfway between pity and amusement. "They didn't fire her. They escorted her out." I blinked. "Security escort?" "Yup. Took her laptop, badge, everything." I let out a slow exhale. "Damn. You know what one of the execs said after?" he asked. "What?" "That it was the most preventable disaster they'd ever seen, if they'd just listened to the guy who actually did the work." There was a small tug in my chest, some mix of validation and closure. Not because they finally realized I'd been competent, I'd always known that. What hit me was the irony. The company had fired me for being too slow, yet the moment I left, everything collapsed too fast. I finished my lunch with a feeling I hadn't had in months, calm. Vindicated. Free. As my friend stood to leave, he clapped me on the shoulder. You made the right call walking away. Everything fell apart the moment you weren't there to hold it up. I smiled. That's the thing. I was never supposed to be holding it up alone. He nodded, gave a knowing grin, and walked out. I stayed a moment longer, staring out the window at people rushing by, each of them carrying some version of a story like mine. And it hit me, sometimes corporate revenge isn't what you do to a company. Sometimes it's simply removing the one piece they never appreciated, and letting gravity take care of the rest. A few days later, I was settling into my new role at a company that actually respected its employees when my phone buzzed with an email from an unfamiliar address. The subject line made my eyebrows shoot up, "Request for professional reference, urgent." I opened it and nearly laughed myself off my chair. It was from Tara. She wrote in a tone so sugary it could rot teeth. She hoped I was doing well, she valued our time working together, and she was confident that my insight into her performance would be extremely helpful for a promising opportunity she was pursuing. Then came the kicker. She asked if I could provide a positive reference highlighting my teamwork, reliability, and technical competence. I sat there for a moment, staring at the screen, stunned by the sheer audacity. This was the same person who got me fired, tanked a major client deliverable, and nearly dragged me into an internal investigation. Now she wanted me to vouch for her as if we'd been best friends in the trenches? I drafted a reply that was perfectly professional, impeccably polite, and absolutely lethal. "Hi Tara, I hope you're well. Unfortunately, I can only provide fact-based references, and I believe the project performance documentation already made available to the inquiry team paints the most accurate picture of our working relationship. I recommend using leadership contacts who more directly oversaw your work." Translation: the truth is already on file, and you don't want me to open my mouth. I never heard from her again. But the universe wasn't done with its victory laps. 2 weeks later, a recruiter reached out to me. Apparently one of the companies Tara interviewed with had asked for back-channel references. Someone on the hiring panel knew someone at my old company and decided to dig deeper. The recruiter didn't share the specifics, but they did say this: "We were told you were highly competent, extremely thorough, and that another individual had been, let's say, inaccurately credited for your work. That situation actually reflects very well on your character." I couldn't help smiling. "So you're saying my old mess became my new endorsement?" "Exactly," the recruiter laughed. "Your reputation survived. Hers didn't. The VP didn't fare much better. Word eventually spread that she'd been blacklisted from internal promotions across the industry. Not officially, of course, corporate politics is never that transparent, but hiring committees talk, executives gossip, and no one wants to bring in a leader whose judgment tanked a multi-million-dollar account. Meanwhile, my life moved forward. My new team valued deadlines, sure, but they valued accuracy even more. When I stayed late, someone noticed. When I offered insight, someone listened. When I delivered, they thanked me. Simple things, but when you've been in a toxic environment long enough, respect feels like luxury. One afternoon, my new boss stopped by my desk and said, "You're one of the most reliable people we've hired in years. Whatever your last company didn't see, their loss." I smiled. "Trust me, they see it now." Because that's the thing with workplace revenge. Sometimes you don't need to sabotage the people who wronged you. Sometimes you just need to let their own incompetence catch up to them. And when it does, it hits harder than anything you could have planned. By the time everything unraveled, the VP and her niece were the only ones left trying to outrun the consequences. I didn't lift a finger. I didn't need to. All I did was walk away. And that turned out to be the biggest revenge of all. A month later, I thought the whole saga was dead and buried, another corporate horror story filed away in my mental archive. But life has a strange way of looping back when you least expect it. I was on my way out of the office one evening when I got a text from an unknown number. Normally I would have ignored it, but the preview caught my eye. "You won't believe what your old company just did." It was from a former coworker, Mark, the quiet systems engineer who never got involved in office drama but somehow always knew everything. I called him immediately. "You got a second?" he asked, sounding almost breathless. "Yeah. What happened now? Did they burn the building down?" "Close," he said. "Remember the audit the client demanded after everything blew up?" "Of course." "Well, the audit team finished their report. It's bad. Like, catastrophic." I leaned against my car, half dreading, half savoring what was coming. "How catastrophic?" "The VP and Tara were just the tip of it. Turns out your termination was one of 5 illegal dismissals tied to covering up systemic process violations." I blinked. 5? Yup. Anyone who questioned Tara or slowed down the VP's accelerated delivery strategy was quietly pushed out. HR helped it happen. I shook my head. That tracks way too well. "But here's where it gets wild," Mark continued. "The client, after reviewing the whole report, decided to terminate their master contract early. They pulled everything. Millions of dollars." My jaw dropped. They actually did it. Effective immediately. And guess who they hired to rebuild the entire infrastructure from scratch? Don't tell me, no, not the old company. Mark's voice lowered to a triumphant whisper. A competitor. One that was already courting half the employees your old VP pissed off. I was stunned into silence. He went on. By Monday morning, 14 people resign en masse. 4 senior devs, 2 analysts, the whole design team, and, get this, the director who kept defending the VP? Even he left. I laughed in disbelief. A full team exodus? That's brutal. Oh, it gets better. The CEO tried to stop them by offering last-minute retention bonuses. Someone in the group chat forwarded the message. I sighed. Of course they did. Everyone responded with a single emoji. "Let me guess," skull, he confirmed proudly. "Dead company walking." I covered my eyes, shaking with laughter. Holy hell. And apparently, Mark added, an internal memo is circulating blaming the entire collapse on a lack of stability following multiple staffing transitions. I snorted. So, losing the people they screwed over is now the reason the ship sank? Yep. Exactly that. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I just stood there in the dim glow of the parking lot, thinking about how everything had unfolded so perfectly without me having to force a single thing. "This may sound cheesy," Mark said eventually, "but I think you leaving started the avalanche." I didn't disagree. Toxic workplaces don't crumble because someone attacks them, they crumble because someone stops holding them up. And once I stepped aside, gravity did the rest. Before we hung up, Mark said one last thing. "By the way, that competitor? They asked if I knew how to reach you. They might want to bring you in as a consultant." I smiled, feeling something deep and satisfying settle in my chest. "Tell them I'm interested." The wind picked up as I finally got into my car, the kind of cool breeze that feels like a clean slate. As I pulled onto the road, I glanced in the rearview mirror, not to look back, but just to appreciate the distance between me and the place that tried to make me feel small. In the end, my revenge wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't even planned. It was simply this: I left. They fell. And now I'm rising somewhere they can never follow. Perfect revenge doesn't always look like destruction. Sometimes it looks like success they can see, but never again benefit from. In the end, the most poetic part of the whole story wasn't the VP's downfall, or Tara's unraveling, or the company collapsing under the weight of its own arrogance. It was how little I had to do to make any of it happen. I didn't sabotage anyone. I didn't plot or scheme. I didn't even try to prove a point. I simply walked away from a place that refused to see my worth, and by doing so, I removed the one thread holding their patchwork operation together. They fired me because they thought I was slow. They blamed me because they thought I was disposable. They dismissed me because they thought I'd never be anything without them. But when the audits came, when the logs surfaced, when the client demanded answers, when the teams resigned, when the contracts vanished, and when the company's reputation turned to ash, one truth remained impossible for them to escape: the person they thought was the problem had been their only solution. As I settled deeper into my new role, surrounded by people who valued competence and honesty, I realized the sweetest revenge wasn't watching their downfall, it was that I never once wished to go back. Their chaos no longer belonged to me. Their crisis had become someone else's inheritance. And as for me, I got everything they said I wasn't ready for: growth, recognition, opportunity, stability, respect. All the things they withheld, assuming I'd break without them. But I didn't break. I built. So when people ask what happened with my old company, I tell them the truth: they thought firing me was the end of my story. But really, it was the end of theirs.